Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we're beginning a quiet walk through the mists of time into a world of flickering torches, whispered treaties, and velvet robes rustling down stone corridors. You're about to drift through the long and gentle unfolding of the Capetian dynasty, those steady rulers of medieval France, whose legacy is woven through cathedrals, coinage, and calm, deliberate power. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favorite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. Let us know, too, where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken in the year 987 beneath the soft grey clouds that hang low over the Ile-de-France. The countryside is quiet, dew glistening on hedgerows, and distant bells chiming from a modest chapel nestled among oaks. This is not the France of shining armour or soaring cathedrals, not yet. This France is a patchwork of powerful dukes and independent-minded counts, a realm where the title King of the Franks carries more formality than force. You rise from a straw bed in a small abbey, your footsteps echoing softly on stone as you join the throng making their way to the coronation of Hugh Capet. He is not a conquering warrior or glittering noble. He is modestly dressed, heavy-browed, with a quiet confidence chosen not by divine right or battle, but by election. The great lords of the land has gathered in Senlis to give him the crown, for reasons as pragmatic as they are political. As the church doors swing open, you step into the cool gloom of incense-thick air. The voices of monks rise in unison. The crown, simple and sober, is placed upon Hugh's head. You sense that he is not just being crowned for himself, but for the future. A careful strategy unfolds here. His son Robert will be crowned in his own lifetime, ensuring succession not by vote, but by blood. A hereditary monarchy is quietly being born. Outside, peasants whisper the name Capet with uncertainty. It's not yet a name of grandeur, but it will be. For now, it's a name that means cloth a nod to Hugh's family heritage in the church and his father's cloak-bearing role. It's not regal, but it is dependable. Dependability, it seems, is what France needs most. One curious detail floats through your thoughts. As the feast begins later that night, Hugh Capet is said to have refused to let his sword out of reach, even while sleeping, not out of fear but out of habit. A man used to guarding his power closely, a man who doesn't quite trust the future yet. Historians still debate whether Hugh's rise was truly independent, or whether he was more puppet than prince, his strings quietly pulled by the Archbishop of Reims and other clerics, eager to counterbalance the fading Carolingians. But whether by his own hand or by careful backing, Hugh Capet has set something in motion that will shape France for over 3 centuries. You watch him retire to his modest manor, candlelight flickering against his profile. No fanfare, no triumph, just quiet planning and the weight of a crown that still fits loosely. Sleep lingers at the edge of your vision. The chant of monks rises again in the distance. You awaken beside the crackling hearth of an abbey guest chamber, its warm stones guarding you against the chill of an early 11th century dawn. Outside, roosters announce the day as a young servant lugs firewood across the muddy courtyard. You stretch beneath woolen blankets and rise quietly today. France is in the hands of Hugh's son, Robert II, a man as devout as he is determined. He is known as Robert the Pious, though some say his halo sits askew. He walks with a prayer book tucked under one arm and a bishop's opinion lodged firmly in the other. You follow him now through the narrow chapel halls of Orléans, where he consults with churchmen, signs royal decrees, and touches the hands of beggars. His piety is not just for show, it's stitched into the hem of his daily robe. But while Robert leans heavily on the church, his throne does not sit easily. The great nobles of Aquitaine, Burgundy, and Normandy do not quake before him. The king's power, you notice, stretches just a little beyond Paris, tapering off into baronial thickets where his word means little. He governs a realm where loyalty is still optional and alliances are brittle glass. Still, Robert governs with a quiet persistence, and perhaps with some stubborn romance too, for when you wander into his court at Melun, you find it tangled in controversy. His marriage to Bertha of Burgundy, once his cousin, is under fire. The Pope has declared the union invalid. The Church insists he put her aside, and for a time he does. But love is a restless force. Robert takes her back, then sends her away again, then takes another wife, Constance of Arles, whose southern airs and sharp wit clash loudly with a king's clergy-loving circle. She brings drama, she brings jewels, and eventually she brings conflict. You find yourself seated quietly during one of their many feasts, watching as Constance insists her sons be first in line for the throne. The palace is less a home than a battlefield of inheritance and suspicion. Her children quarrel, her court stirs, her gaze is unflinching. A curious tale flits into your thoughts as you step through the cloister garden. Constance is said to have smuggled poison into the royal chambers, hidden in a hollowed-out apple. The target a bishop she believed stood in the way of her family's future. No proof was ever found, but the story lingers, like a wisp of incense in an old nave. Robert, though beset by both court and conscience, continues to rule until the end of his days, never quite triumphant, never quite defeated. He dies in 1031, and his son Henry inherits a throne shaped as much by ecclesiastical patience as by royal will. And yet, scholars still murmur over how much power Robert ever truly wielded. Was he a model Christian monarch setting the tone for a pious dynasty, or merely a gentle soul adrift in a sea of forceful lords? No firm answer ever settles. You leave the court behind, its prayers echoing in tall vaults, and step into the countryside where Robert's memory will soon fade into stone carved above a chapel doorway, softened by moss and centuries. The sun dips low across the tiled roofs, and you feel yourself drifting again back to sleep, back into time. You awaken beneath the shadow of Montlhéry, the stone tower watching over a France still patchy and perilous. It is the year 1031, and Henry the Robert the Pious's son, now carries the Capetian crown. Though barely 30, he already wears the look of a man who sleeps lightly and trusts few. You find him at his writing table. No velvet-draped throne here, just the hum of quills and the rustle of parchment. Henry is thoughtful, perhaps too much so. A king not bred for glory but survival. His own mother, Queen Constance, had favoured his younger brother for the throne, sparking a civil war in the royal household before the crown ever touched Henry's brow. The court, you observe, is sparse and quiet. His advisers speak in low voices. He rides often out to the edges of his authority, where rebellious barons test his mettle and bishops weigh their loyalties. His realm is narrow, focused along the Seine and Loire. where the royal writ still holds. Beyond that, the dukes and counts rule with little thought for Paris. Yet Henry, though rarely bold, proves durable. You travel with him to Normandy in 1047, where he throws his weight behind a young duke struggling to maintain his inheritance. The boy is named William. You see them ride together, kicking up dust along the banks of the Orne. With Henry's support, William triumphs at the Battle of Valles Dunes. The boy will one day cross the sea and conquer England, but for now, he is simply grateful. At court, one detail sticks with you. Henry is said to have worn his crown only once a year, on Easter. Some say it was humility. Others claim it was a subtle reminder that kingship, like Christ's resurrection, was sacred and rare. It is a curious habit in a time when many rulers never remove their diadems. Still, despite his prudence, Henry faces trials. His own son, Philip, must be crowned during his lifetime to secure the line. It happens in 1059 when Philip is just 7. You watch the boy fidget in the ceremonial robes, while Henry looks on stern, unreadable, perhaps a touch relieved. But even as Philip's future is prepared, Henry's grip on power is loosening. Famine strikes in the early 1050s. The nobility grows more independent, their castles rising like teeth in the countryside, and whispers of royal weakness echo in Latin scrolls. Historians still argue whether Henry was a king who held the line, or one who lost ground inch by inch. Some suggest he managed little more than a caretaker reign. Others note that he preserved the dynasty during a time of real fragility, when the Capetian name could have vanished with a single poorly aimed dagger. He dies in 1060, quietly, near Vitry-aux-Loges. No great battle marks his passing. No rebellion crushes his name. He simply fades, as moss grows thick on monastery walls. You sit a while beside the grave, its stone damp and cold, and you wonder not every king is a conqueror. Some simply hold the thread. Outside, the wind rustles through chapel ivy. The candles burn low. You awaken in the soft pink hush of a spring dawn, in a chamber above the Seine where fishmongers begin to stir. The year is 1060 and the boy king Philip is only 7. He sits awkwardly in the cathedral at Rheims, his crown too large, his robes too heavy, while his mother, Anne of Kiev, and the regent Baldwin of Flanders guide the realm with practiced hands. You watch Philip from a respectful distance as he grows first into his throne, then into his appetites. Unlike his predecessors, Philip seems less burdened by the weight of kingship and more intrigued by its privileges. His court becomes a stage for finery, delicacies, and murmurings of scandal. He's clever, though subtle in a way not always appreciated by chroniclers. You see him working in shadows, forming pacts with barons, withdrawing from wars when it suits him, and slowly reasserting the monarchy's reach in a land still fractured into stubborn fiefs. The Capetian crown gleams a little brighter with each patient year. Still, one can't help but notice Philip is fond of pleasure. He eats well, drinks deeply, and dallies with more than one noble's wife. One tale in particular stands out. He falls in love with Bertrade of Montfort, already married to Count Fulk of Anjou, against all counsel. Philip weds her anyway, brushing aside canon law like crumbs from a feast. You are there when the church responds. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Philip is excommunicated. Each time he tiptoes back into communion, and each time he finds himself once again at odds with the Pope, he's not so much defiant as slippery, a king who makes deals behind velvet curtains rather than in broad sunlight. The people, However, see stability. France does not collapse under his rule. The coin holds value, the harvest are steady, and the royal lineage continues. In this, Philip succeeds. He keeps the flame burning. You take note of a curious detail whispered among the court scribes. Philip was one of the first Capetian kings to make sustained use of a permanent chancery. A kind of royal bureaucracy begins to take shape, still fragile, but growing roots. The idea that kings can rule through ink as much as through sword gains traction. Yet historians remain divided. Was Philip simply idle and indulgent, content to dine and dither while the real power remained in the hands of local lords? Or was he quietly laying the groundwork for a future where Capetian kings would act more like emperors than caretakers? The answer, it seems, depends on which manuscript you trust. Philip dies in 1108 after a reign that spanned nearly half a century longer than most kings could dream. No dramatic farewell, no blaze of glory, just a passing into the folds of time as his son Louis prepares to inherit the mantle. You watch as his body is laid to rest at the Abbey of Saint-Benoît-sur-Loire, the monks chanting low and long. A gentle rain begins outside, dotting the cloister stones, and once again you find yourself drifting, cradled by history's quiet breath. You awaken to the muffled sound of hooves on damp earth and the distant call of a hunting horn. It is 1108, and the kingdom belongs now to Louis VI, though most still call him Louis the Fat. His frame, it's true, is expansive, but his mind is sharper than it looks from a throne cushion. You catch your first glimpse of him not in royal robes, but astride a charger, muddy boots and all, riding hard toward another rebellious baron's keep. This is a king who prefers motion to ceremony. You follow him as he gallops through the forests of Ile-de-France, where bandits once thrived and lords once ruled unchecked. One by one, he reins them in. From the castle of Montlhéry to the wild edges of the Vexin, Louis uses alliances, sieges, and just enough swordplay to reassert the monarchy's will. You rest with him one evening beneath a wind-bent oak, his tent canvas flapping gently in the breeze. He shares salted meat and hard bread with his men. His laughter is warm, but his eyes are wary. He is building something not a new France, exactly, but a firmer one. At court, the tone is changing. The royal household is no longer a court of idlers. Louis welcomes scholars, administrators, and men of the church. The Abbey of Saint-Denis, where the Capetians are entombed, becomes a symbol of both spiritual and administrative reform. You hear the scratch of quills as clerks draft letters with royal seals, the beginnings of a state that governs with parchment as well as pikes. And yet, even this sturdy monarch finds his reign beset by irony. Louis, often mocked for his bulk, becomes one of the most tirelessly active kings in Europe. A curious tale emerges from his campaigns. He once climbed a siege ladder himself, despite his girth, and planted a banner over the enemy's wall, to the amazement and mild horror of his advisers. Still, not all is conquest. You stand beside him as he gazes across the Seine at Paris, dreaming of a city worthy of a capital. He strengthens bridges, fortifies the Ile de la Cité, and takes small steps toward making Paris more than a market town with bells. Historians still discuss whether Louis VI was a visionary monarch or simply a stubborn regional lord who knew how to throw his weight around. Some say he was the last of the medieval warrior kings. Others argue he was the first to understand that kingship in France would require more than muscle. He dies in 1137 after years of fever and fatigue. His son, the slender and thoughtful Louis VII, inherits not only the crown but also a complex realm and a bride with lands that far outshine the royal domain. You watch as Louis VI is carried into Saint-Denis, the great abbey echoing with chants. His life was not elegant, but it was effective. Outside, the sun glints on the Seine as the bells of Paris toll in rhythm with your slowing breath. You awaken to the rustle of linen tapestries and the soft breath of wind through an open lancet window. It is the year 1137 and a new king, Louis VII, has just taken the throne. You catch a glimpse of him kneeling in quiet prayer, the candlelight flickering against his youthful features. This is a man more monk than monarch, raised in the cloisters before fate handed him a crown. He is slim, serious, devout, and beside him stands a woman who turns every head in the court, Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is young, radiant, and vastly powerful, bringing half of southwestern France as her dowry. You follow their wedding procession through the streets of Bordeaux, the air thick with the scent of rosemary and rose petals. The union seems like destiny, but you soon sense tension beneath the gold-threaded veils. Louis governs with his conscience, Eleanor with her cleverness. He wants to build abbeys and make peace. She craves pageantry and poetry. You find yourself in the great halls of Poitiers, watching troubadours perform for a court far livelier than Louis ever imagined. Their journey takes them to the Holy Land in 1147 as they depart on the Second Crusade. You walk beside them on the long march south, past Byzantine palaces and across scorching Anatolian plains. The journey is plagued by hardship. Eleanor rides in armour, flanked by her vassals. Louis trudges ahead, brooding, humbled by military failures and diplomatic stumbles. In Antioch, whispers grow louder. Eleanor is accused falsely or not of being too close to her uncle Raymond. Louis flies into quiet fury. Their marriage begins to unravel, not with thunder, but with silence. You see it in the way they no longer meet each other's eyes. In 1152 the annulment comes. They part without weeping and with barely a word. And then the twist. Just weeks later, Eleanor marries Henry Plantagenet, the future King of England. You can almost feel the tremor ripple through France. Overnight, vast lands once tethered to the French crown now fall under the shadow of a rival. You stand with Louis in the gardens of Saint-Denis. He watches the horizon, lips tight. The gentle priest murmurs something consoling, but Louis only nods. There is no going back. One curious note remains in your mind during the crusade. Louis once walked barefoot through the city of Jerusalem as an act of penance. Dust covered his robes. Blood seeped through his feet. Even the Saracens, it said, looked on in silence. His piety may not have won wars, but it left an impression. Historians remain divided over Louis VII. Was he a failed crusader and weak husband, or a man who quietly laid the groundwork for the reforms that followed? He ruled for over 4 decades, and though his power shrank, the respect he earned did not. He dies in 1180 gently, in the embrace of the abbey walls that once shaped his youth. As he fades, his son Philip, sharp-eyed and ambitious, prepares to reclaim what was lost. Outside, rain taps gently on slate roofs, and your thoughts drift with it into stillness. You awaken under a wide sky streaked with morning mist. Just outside the royal encampment of Gisors, the scent of damp earth and roasted oats wafts from the tents. It is 1180 and a new king, Philip II, soon to be called Augustus, has taken the reins of France. You watch him pace, quiet and calculating, fingers laced behind his back, Where his father Louis VII was hesitant, Philip is precise. You follow him into the early years of his reign, where he works to reclaim the power his forebears had gradually ceded to the great barons. He writes laws. He strengthens the crown's grip on royal towns. But his gaze never strays far from the horizon and the man who now rules England, Henry VII, husband of Eleanor of Aquitaine and father of Richard the Lionheart. Philip bides his time. He attends councils, hosts envoys, and reads reports with meticulous care. You see him quietly nudge barons into his orbit with grants, marriages, and the occasional threat. There's no fanfare, just slow, deliberate consolidation. Then, in 1187, Jerusalem falls to Saladin. Christendom reels. The call for the Third Crusade rises like a tide, and Philip answers it, though not without strategy. You watch as he joins forces with Richard of England, their ships casting white wakes across the Mediterranean. Two kings, side by side, but not for long. In Acre, tempers flare. Philip, ill and restless, leaves the campaign early. Some say it was illness. Others suspect frustration. Philip was not one to share glory. You walk with him as he returns to France, his eyes already scanning for opportunity, and opportunity soon arrives. With Henry II dead and Richard held captive in Germany, Philip strikes. You march alongside him through Normandy, where castles fall like dominoes. He reclaims lands long held by the Plantagenet Anjou, Maine, Touraine. With each conquest, the French crown grows heavier with real power. A curious detail clings to your thoughts. Philip is the first French king to adopt the title King of France rather than King of the Franks. It's subtle, but enormous. No longer just a tribal overlord, he is sovereign over a unified realm. Or so the title hopes. You pass through Paris, where the city itself is changing. Philip orders new walls, markets, and the founding of the University of Paris. The capital is no longer just a place, it is becoming a centre. And yet, historians still debate Philip's character. Was he truly a patriot king, or simply a shrewd manipulator who seized a rare moment of English vulnerability? Some call him ruthless, even cruel. Others see in him the architect of modern France. He reigns for 43 years, and as his silver hair fades into dust, the Capetian crown gleams brighter than it ever has before. You watch him buried at Saint-Denis, his name etched in stone, his legacy etched in policy. Outside, the bells of Paris ring low and slow, and you drift once more into stillness. You awaken in a candlelit scriptorium, where the scratch of quills against vellum echoes softly between vaulted stone walls. It is 1203 and a new king, Louis XV, has just ascended the throne. You spot him in a corner, seated on a carved oak bench, poring over reports not of tournaments or feasts, but of sieges and cities. His reign, though brief, is already stirring. You travel with Louis as he picks up where his father, Philip Augustus, left off. The French crown now rests on sturdier foundations, and Louis means to build on them with steel and parchment. Within weeks, he marches south, not for celebration, but for war. The Albigensian crusade is underway. Heresy, the Church says, has taken root in Languedoc. But as you march with Louis's army past abbeys and sun-drenched vineyards, it becomes clear that the campaign is as much about politics as piety. He lays siege to Avignon in 1226, an ordeal of mud, hunger, and negotiations. You see him, cloaked and weary, standing before the walls as the city finally yields. But he doesn't stop there. Louis pushes deeper into the south, into lands where loyalty to Paris is still uncertain. And yet, despite these efforts, the climate takes its toll. Fevers haunt the tents. Mosquitoes buzz through damp air. Somewhere near Montpensier, the king falls ill. His condition worsens quickly. By November of that same year, he is gone. He ruled only 3 years. You witness the hurried funeral preparations. The crown passes to his son, Louis IX, just a boy of 12. And so, power now slips into the hands of the Queen Mother, Blanche of Castile, whose fierce intelligence makes many a noble think twice about rebellion. A curious tale follows Louis VIII after death. It is said that, during his final days, he dictated several orders directly from his sickbed, refusing to hand over decisions to anyone else even when he could no longer rise. His signature, shaky and thin, remains on a few parchment scrolls to this day. Historians often pass over Louis VIII too quickly. Some say he was little more than a transitional figure, a shadow in the Capetian line. Others suggest he might have achieved great reforms, had fate offered him just a few more winters. But you, having walked beside his soldiers, tasted the dust of his southern campaigns, you sense his intent. He was not content to inherit power, he meant to shape it. The bells toll softly from a distant monastery. The wind stirs the tapestry in the corner of the room, and as Blanche steadies the realm for her young son, you close your eyes again, the page turning gently to a new chapter. You awaken to the hush of candle flames and the scent of aged scrolls. The year is 1226, and young Louis IX, only 12 years old, is king in name, yet it is his mother, Blanche of Castile, who truly rules. You follow her through the corridors of the royal palace, where silk hems whisper on stone and political alliances are forged over steaming goblets of wine. Blanche governs with a precision that commands respect. She's not loud, not theatrical, just effective. She wards off rebellions, negotiates peace with the English, and holds the crown steady for her son. You watch her sign treaties with a hand that never trembles, even when nobles bristle at her authority. Louis, meanwhile, is growing. You glimpse him bent over illuminated manuscripts, reciting verses from scripture, and walking quietly among monks at Royaumont Abbey. He's thin, pale, and unusually gentle for a prince. Yet there's something luminous in his manner, a seriousness that seems to deepen by the day. By the time he takes full control of the crown in 1234, Louis is already seen not just as a king, but as a moral compass. He rules not from a throne of fear, but from a seat of fairness. You see him presiding over court under the famous oak of Vincennes, where he hears disputes in the open air, unguarded, robes simple, hands folded. One day, a peasant brings forth a case against a noble. The room stills. Louis listens intently, then rules in the peasant's favour. The noble bows reluctantly. You catch a brief, satisfied nod from the king, not prideful, just assured. A curious image follows Louis. He wore a hairshirt beneath his royal garments, an act of penance no one demanded. Some say he even gave up wine during Lent, despite being surrounded by barrels of it. Others claim he washed the feet of beggars in secret during Holy Week. The palace gossipers don't know what to make of him. Louis's reign brings not just piety, but structure. He reforms the coinage, strengthens royal justice, and insists that his officials answer not just to him, but to their conscience. Royal inspectors called enquêteurs are sent across the kingdom to check for corruption. It's a slow revolution, carried out in scrolls and silence. Still, not all is divine harmony. The growing Jewish communities in France face rising pressures, fueled by both religious fervour and economic envy. In 1242, Louis orders the burning of thousands of Jewish manuscripts, believing it an act of orthodoxy. You watch the flames curl around delicate inkwork, an unsettling moment in a reign otherwise guided by gentle law. Historians still debate how to judge Louis IX. Is he the ideal medieval monarch, or an impossible mix of sainthood and rigidity? Some call him France's last truly moral king. Others argue his vision was too narrow, too pious for a changing world. But as you sit beside him in the quiet chapel of Sainte-Chapelle, watching the sunlight stream through coloured glass, it's hard to see him as anything but sincere. Outside, the court is quiet, the pages whisper, and sleep begins to press gently at your temples once more. You awaken beneath the brilliant blue and crimson light of stained glass windows. It is the late 1240s, and Sainte-Chapelle Louis IX's radiant Gothic jewel is nearly complete. You wander its upper chapel in silence, where the walls seem to dissolve into colour and scripture. This is a king not merely ruling with laws and armies, but with beauty, sacredness, and symmetry. Louis walks softly through this world he's helping shape. You find him presiding over the construction, his fingers grazing the polished columns as artisans and masons bow in quiet reverence. The chapel is meant to house relics of Christ's Passion, including the crown of thorns, which Louis himself carried barefoot through the streets of Paris, cloaked in simple white. And yet, beyond the holy walls of Sainte-Chapelle, the kingdom is far from serene. You ride with Louis into the southern territories, still sensitive from the wounds of the Albigensian crusade. The people speak in different dialects, their loyalties scattered. He treats these lands with deliberate care, establishing schools, promoting local monasteries, even intervening in regional disputes with a firm but fair hand. France, slowly, becomes more than just a realm of lords. It becomes a nation with a heart. One quirky detail from this era, Louis is said to have carried a small wooden comb with him, fastidiously grooming his beard each morning before prayer, not for vanity but for dignity. A clean beard, he once remarked to a young courtier, reflects a clean conscience. In the early 1250s, his attention shifts outward. Louis has long harboured dreams of crusade, not the glory-seeking kind, but a solemn vow to reclaim the Holy Land. You stand beside him as he gathers his council, announcing the 7th Crusade. Many are stunned. France is at peace. His health is fragile, but the king's voice is calm. God has called me, he says, and no one dares argue. You journey with him to the shores of Aigues-Mortes, where ships are loaded with grain, armour and relics. Children wave linen banners. Old men whisper of Charlemagne. Louis boards the lead vessel beneath a sky the colour of brass. And yet, historians remain divided on this moment. Was the crusade an act of sacred commitment or a costly misstep driven by idealism France would suffer in his absence? The treasury would strain, lives would be lost, but in this moment, Louis believes. You return briefly to Paris in his absence, where the mechanisms of justice he built continue to function. It is a testament to his reforms that the kingdom does not unravel. The judiciary holds. The roads remain safe. Even the tax collectors are, oddly enough, restrained. When word reaches France that the king has been captured in Egypt, held for ransom during the disastrous Battle of Al-Mansura, the people do not revolt. Instead, they pray in towns and hamlets. Candles are lit in windows. Grain is offered to monks. The entire kingdom seems to pause, and then, miraculously, he is released. A heavy ransom is paid. Yes, but the king lives. He returns years later, thinner, quieter, older. You glimpse him stepping off the ship at Aigues-Mortes again, now wrapped in modest robes, carrying only a wooden cross and a book of psalms. Historians will forever question whether the crusade was folly or faith, but to Louis, the answer is simple. God willed it, and he obeyed. You walk beside him as he re-enters Paris in silence, no trumpets, no parades, just the toll of cathedral bells and the hush of a grateful people. Outside, the night deepens, and you quietly, peacefully drift again. You awaken to the soft creak of a ship's timber and the salty air of a distant shore. The year is 1270 and Louis IX is once again far from France. Despite age, illness, and past defeat, he has embarked on another crusade, this time to Tunis. You stand with him on the deck as the wind whips at his simple cloak and the white sails strain toward a hazy horizon. There's a quiet stubbornness to Louis now. He does not speak much, but when he does, it is with absolute conviction. He believes this crusade will heal not just the Holy Land, but the soul of Christendom. You sense a man searching not for conquest, but for something eternal. The sun in Tunisia is unforgiving. You feel it burn through the linen canopy as soldiers unload crates and pitch camp along the coastline. Disease creeps in like smoke dysentery, fever, and heat stroke sap the strength of even the strongest men. You watch Louis kneel on a coarse woolen mat, praying in the dust beside his tent, and then, one August morning, the hush settles over the camp. Louis lies feverish on a straw pallet, eyes half closed, whispering psalms. He dies there, not in battle, but on foreign soil, within sight of the sea. His last words are said to be a prayer for Jerusalem. You sit quietly by the cot long after the king's breath stills. Outside, the wind carries the scent of citrus and salt. There is no clamour, just the hush of history folding itself around him. Back in France, the shock is deep. His body is returned home in stages, boiled, separated, and reassembled, as was the practice for royal remains transported over long distances. A strange detail, perhaps too strange to linger on long, but it reminds you even sainthood begins with fragile flesh. In 1297, Pope Boniface VIII canonizes Louis. He becomes Saint Louis, the only French king ever to achieve such status. You pass beneath the soaring towers of Notre Dame as the bells ring for his feast day. People light candles beside tapestries embroidered with lilies and crosses. Yet historians remain divided, even on this most luminous figure. Some praise his incorruptibility, his devotion to justice, his humility. Others note his inflexible orthodoxy, his harsh stance on heresy and the Jews, and the severe costs of his crusades. Was he the model of medieval piety, or an uncompromising soul in a world shifting toward modernity, but in the streets of Paris, in the stained glass of Sainte-Chapelle, in the careful codes of royal law he left behind? Louis IX is everywhere. You wander the city one last time in his memory. You cross the Petit Pont where his reforms ensured safe passage. You visit the royal courts where his justice endures. You sit on a wooden bench in the Place de Grève, where merchants pay fair taxes thanks to his laws. The bells of Saint-Denis toll slowly, and you feel his reign long, luminous, and complex fade gently into the folds of memory. Outside, a breeze lifts a tattered banner along the Seine, and your eyelids grow heavy once again. You awaken beneath the high timbered ceiling of a royal audience hall in Paris, where the scent of beeswax and polished oak hangs in the air. It is 1270, and the Capetian crown now rests on the head of Philip III, called Le Hardi, the Bold. Though he's inherited his father's devotion to justice, he's no longer guided by the same clear, solitary light. You rise quietly and watch as courtiers bustle around him, offering scrolls, reports, and quiet counsel. Philip is modest, earnest, and truthfully more comfortable following than leading. Where Louis and I governed with moral certainty, Philip rules with trust in his ministers. Among them is Pierre de la Brosse, a royal surgeon turned advisor, whose influence grows unsettlingly fast. You catch murmured conversations about favoritism and ambition. The court, you realize, is shifting. Still, Philip's early reign is marked by continuity. He maintains his father's policies, strengthens administration, and attends devoutly to Mass. You join him on slow processions through the streets of Paris, where common folk bow respectfully, if not quite reverently. He is, after all, the son of a saint. But then, events take a sharper turn. In 1271, Philip inherits the vast county of Toulouse through marriage and diplomacy, extending royal authority deeper into the south. It's a quiet triumph, yet it also invites new tensions. Regional nobles now bristle under closer scrutiny from Paris. Then comes the ill-fated campaign in Aragon. You ride with him through the dusty passes of the Pyrenees in 1285 as he seeks to install his son-in-law on the Aragonese throne. It is a long, exhausting trek. The army is burdened by disease, supply shortages, and the bitter sting of mountain wind. Philip's health begins to falter. One quiet moment stays with you, Philip, seated by a campfire, his royal armour dulled by soot and fatigue, reads softly from a prayer book. He keeps it tucked in a pouch close to his breast, worn dog-eared, its pages smudged with ash and wax. He dies before the campaign ends, passing away in Perpignan at just 40 years old. You watch the courtiers whisper, uncertain who will now carry the legacy forward. The crown passes to his son, Philip, a boy with a sharp jaw and even sharper thoughts. Curiously, shortly after Philip III's death, Pierre de la Brosse, the once favoured minister, is arrested and hanged. No clear reason is recorded. Some say he conspired against the Queen. Others hint at secrets buried deep within the walls of the Louvre. Historians continue to weigh Philip's reign gently. Was he a weak ruler in a dangerous age, or a stabilizing figure whose quiet loyalty preserved the House of Capet in an era of transition? The evidence is as soft as candlelight glimpses and guesses. In the silence of Saint-Denis, you stand by his tomb. A stone effigy rests above him, hands folded, gaze eternal. Around him, the abbey hums with faint echoes of kings who have come and gone. Outside, the wind carries the sound of a tolling bell, 9 slow rings, and once again, you let your breath fall gently, your thoughts settling into stillness. You awaken in the thick stillness of early dawn, beneath the shadowed eaves of the royal palace in Paris. The year is 1285, and Philip III now reigns La Belle the Fair. He is young, statuesque, and utterly unreadable. You catch your first glimpse of him standing before a tall mirror, adjusting his cloak without expression. His features are pale and elegant, but there's something cold behind the eyes like marble that remembers winter. You move quietly through the corridors of his court, where everything feels more calculated, more precise. Gone are the lively debates and moral concerns of earlier reigns. Under Philip, administration becomes an instrument of power. Law is no longer just justice, it is policy. You watch the royal scribes at work, producing writ after writ, sealing them with wax and authority. The king, rarely seen in public, is often deep in consultation with a circle of legists-trained lawyers who treat governance like a ledger. You sit in on meetings where taxes are revised, coins reweighted, and privileges revoked with the stroke of a pen. The crown, under Philip, becomes not just holy but sovereign, unquestionable. One defining moment comes in 1302. You walk beside Philip into the chambers of the first ever Estates General, a gathering of clergy, nobility, and commoners. It's not democracy, exactly, but it is a new kind of performance. The king now gathers voices from across France, not to be ruled by them, but to bolster his own will. Then comes the clash with Pope Boniface VIII. It begins with taxes on church lands and escalates into a storm of papal bulls and royal decrees. Philip, refusing to bow, sends troops to arrest the Pope at Anagni. The Pope is humiliated. And not long after, he dies. You hear the whisper around the court. The King of France struck the Pope with iron, and the Pope died of shame. Philip appoints a French Pope in his place, Clement I, marking the beginning of the Avignon papacy. The papacy itself is now firmly, almost shockingly, in French hands. You wonder if the heavens tremble quietly as the king looks out his palace window, but perhaps the most chilling moment is yet to come. In 1307, the king turns his gaze to the Knights Templar, wealthy, mysterious, and independent. On October 13th, at dawn, coordinated arrests sweep across France. You walk through the stone corridors of their preceptories as guards drag men from prayer. Accusations of heresy, confessions under torture, fire and ash. You are there, quietly, on the day Grand Master Jacques de Molay is burned on the Ile de la Cité. His last words, defiant, are said to have cursed the king and the pope. Both will die within a year. A strange detail stays with you. Philip is rumoured to have kept meticulous records of each Templar's seized possessions down to the last button and chalice. Efficiency, yes, but also obsession. Historians still struggle with Philip IV. Was he a tyrant in robes of silk, or a reformer who dragged France sometimes brutally into the modern age? His reign is cleaner on parchment than it ever was in flesh. He dies in 1314 unexpectedly, after a hunting accident. You watch his body return to Saint-Denis, the chapel quiet, the air tense, and as the Capetian line begins to fracture under the weight of his rigid control, you step back from the mirror-like chill of his legacy. The fire in the hearth crackles low, and you begin to drift once more. You awaken beside the flickering glow of a dwindling hearth in the first uncertain months after the death of Philip IV. It is now 1314, and the throne has passed to his eldest son Louis VI, known as Le Hutin, the Quarrelsome. You hear the title whispered in corners, murmured by courtiers who eye each other warily. The crown still gleams, but the harmony beneath it is beginning to fray. Louis is quick-tempered, blunt, and far less composed than his marble-carved father. You watch as he clashes openly with nobles and advisors, pushing for reforms without finesse. His court is restless. The mood in Paris is shifting, less reverent, more opportunistic. One of Louis's first acts startles many. He issues a decree allowing the serfs of the royal domain to buy their freedom. It's a gesture both idealistic and financial. Some praise it as a step toward justice. Others mutter that it's merely a way to refill the royal coffers drained by years of crusades, wars, and extravagant courts. But then comes the matter of his late wife, Margaret of Burgundy. You hear the whispers before you see the evidence. The infamous Tour de Nesle affair still clings like cobwebs to the Capetian name. Margaret had been imprisoned for alleged adultery, and though she died soon after, under suspicious circumstances, her shadow looms large. Some say she was strangled. Others say she wasted away in icy solitude. No one knows for certain. Louis quickly remarries Clementia of Hungary, a match meant to stabilize the court. But before the child they conceive is even born, the king falls ill after a game of jeu de paume, an early form of tennis. He drinks chilled wine to cool down. A fever sets in. Within days, he is dead. You stand quietly as physicians shake their heads and courtiers scurry to secure claims. Louis ruled for barely 2 years. A strange, lingering rumour clings to the story. Some say he was poisoned, others blame the wine, tainted by poor storage or malice. Historians remain divided, though most chalk it up to heat stroke or a sudden infection, made worse by the August sun. You watch as the crown briefly passes to his unborn child, John I, who lives only 5 days. His death, like a candle snuffed in wind, leaves the realm suddenly uncertain. For the first time, France stares into a dynastic void, and yet, through it all, the mechanisms of Philip IV's rule still grind on. The courts remain, the taxes are collected, the coinage holds. You find this strangely comforting, even as the monarchy trembles. Historians look back on Louis XV as a figure trapped between legacy and loss. Was he a reformer trying to right his father's wrongs, or a reactionary ruler overwhelmed by scandal and ill health? His brief reign leaves just enough evidence to argue either way. You drift now through the halls of the Louvre, where the next heir Philip V prepares to seize the reins. Outside, the Seine glides slowly beneath the silver moon. The bells do not toll tonight, and you close your eyes once again. You awaken to the soft flutter of tapestries and the gentle clink of gold thread being sewn by quiet hands. It is 1316, and Philip V has taken the throne, not by divine right alone, but by delicate manoeuvring. His nephew, John III, the infant king, lived only 5 days. Philip, Louis XV's brother, now argues the crown cannot pass to a girl, Louis's daughter, Joan. And so, the concept of Salic law quietly solidifies, like frost settling on morning stone. You observe the court, full of careful glances and veiled words. Philip is neither as handsome as his father nor as impulsive as his brother. He governs with calculation, but without cruelty. His court is organized, his tone measured. You feel the gears of governance turning smoothly again, if a bit coldly. Philip enacts reforms with quiet urgency. You walk the halls of his chancery and watch as he standardizes weights and measures across France. No small feat in a realm still made of dozens of semi-independent regions. The kingdom becomes more navigable, more coherent. Commerce flows more predictably. Royal justice arrives with greater clarity. He also institutes better oversight of local officials, provosts and bailiffs now watched by royal inspectors. a continuation of St. Louis's vision. You attend a tribunal where one corrupt official is stripped of office before an audience of stone-faced peers. Order is being enforced, not by sword, but by rule. And yet, shadows linger. You still feel the echo of the Tour de Nesle affair. Two of Philip's own sisters-in-law were imprisoned alongside Margaret of Burgundy. Their disgrace continues to stain the Capetian name, though it is rarely spoken aloud now. One of them, Blanche, remains cloistered in a nunnery, her royal status reduced to silence and thread work. You once catch a glimpse of her in a distant corridor head, bowed, fingers calloused, voice never heard. Philip V also faces unrest in the countryside. The lepers plot of 1321 spreads panic, a conspiracy theory, born of fear and ignorance, accuses lepers of poisoning wells, possibly at the instigation of Jews or Muslims. You witness villages descend into suspicion and horror. Executions follow. The king does not intervene decisively. His silence on this point stains an otherwise meticulous rule. One curious note catches your attention late one night. In the royal archives, Philip is said to have had an intense interest in astrology. Several of his decisions, such as campaign launches or treaty signings, were reportedly delayed due to the alignment of stars. Whether true or whispered court myth, it suggests a man caught between earthly logic and celestial awe. Historians regard Philip V with quiet respect. Was he a competent architect of royal administration? Certainly. Was he a visionary? Less so. But in a time of uncertainty, he made the realm function. He dies in 1322, only 6 years into his reign, likely of illness. No great battle, no succession war, just the slow failing of breath and a solemn procession to Saint-Denis. And now the line continues. One final Capetian brother remains. You step through the snow-dusted gardens of the palace. The branches bare, the sky a deep velvet grey, and you let sleep draw close again, like a fur-lined cloak. You awaken to the soft hush of freshly fallen snow, blanketing the courtyards of Vincennes. The year is 1322, and the final son of Philip IV has become King Charles the Wrath, called Le Bel, the Fair, like his father. The resemblance is startling at first, the same elegant features, the same poise. But as you watch him pace the echoing halls of the royal palace, you sense a quieter, demeanorless iron, more ice. Charles inherits a kingdom still held together by threads of paperwork and policy. You drift beside him as he leans into the legal traditions laid by his brother and father. But where Philip IV was commanding and Philip V was calculating, Charles rules with caution. His reign is not one of bold reforms or grand visions. It is one of maintenance, of trying not to let the seams unravel. He continues the careful work of legal codification and court oversight. You attend royal sessions where tax officials are reprimanded and new coinage is minted with sharper standards. A fragile stability lingers, but it is just that fragile. You travel with Charles to Aquitaine in the early years of his reign. Relations with England have soured once more. Edward II had previously held lands in southwestern France as a vassal to the French crown. But tensions over homage, rights, and feudal dignity strain diplomacy. Charles seizes lands in response, escalating the standoff. Eventually, envoys from England arrive bearing offers of peace, delivered by none other than Queen Isabella, Charles's sister. You stand discreetly by a firelit hall as Isabella, known for her cool brilliance, negotiates with the French king. She charms, she maneuvers. and within months returns to England. There, history takes its own turn. She and her ally Roger Mortimer will overthrow Edward II. But in France, Charles remains removed from the scandal, his court whispering only carefully. Back at home, another scandal weighs on him more personally. Charles had been married to Blanche of Burgundy, one of the accused in the Tour de Nesle affair. Though confined for years, her presence remains a symbol of the dynasty's tainted honour. Charles has the marriage annulled. He remarries twice more in quick succession, seeking an heir. One quiet anecdote remains with you. Charles is said to have a particular fondness for hawking, even slipping away from court for long hours just to ride with his falcons across the frosted fields of Brie. There's something solitary in it, less royal sport than contemplative escape. But time grows short. His third wife, Jeanne of Evreux, is pregnant, and France waits, breath held. If the child is a boy, the Capetian line continues. If not, the crown will pass beyond the direct line for the first time in 3 centuries. In February of 1328, the child is born. You stand among the gathered nobility, the room filled with hope, and then the quiet, respectful sorrow. It is a girl. Charles IV dies soon after. No violence, no rebellion, just a candle quietly flickering out. With him, the direct male line of Hugh Capet ends. Historians have long debated how to interpret his reign. Was Charles IV a careful steward who managed a kingdom in decline, or a passive placeholder, unable to inspire or restore? No great wars, no lasting peace, just quiet rule and a carefully managed end. You stand now in the Cathedral of Saint-Denis, where the stone vaults echo with the last rites of the last Capetian king, and as the sun lowers behind stained glass windows, casting lavender light across the marble tombs, you let your mind grow still and listen for what comes next. You awaken to the muffled murmurs of courtiers cloaked in fur and tension. It is 1328, and for the first time in generations, the throne of France sits empty of a direct Capetian heir. The kingdom hesitates. The air itself feels paused, like a held breath. You walk softly through the Louvre's corridors, where arguments flicker behind closed doors and scrolls of genealogy are pored over like sacred scripture. The question echoes through every stone hall and village green: who will wear the crown? The obvious claimant, at least to some, is Edward III of England, grandson of Philip IV or his mother, Isabella. But many in France hesitate, a queen's son, through the female line that, many argue, is too uncertain, too foreign, too risky. You hear the term Salic law invoked again and again. The old Frankish custom, once vague, now sharpens into policy: the throne must not pass through women. And so, the crown shifts sideways to a cousin, Philip of Valois, nephew of Philip V. You watch him ascend to the throne as Philip V, calm and self-assured, his grip already firm on the symbols of power. The Capetian line has ended, but the dynasty continues, reborn as the House of Valois. The court breathes again, but only briefly. Not all accept the verdict. You cross the channel and observe Edward III watching from England, silent for now, but simmering. His claim has been denied, and though he pays homage for his French lands, you can already sense the weight of steel being gathered. The 100 Years' War is still a generation away, but its spark lies glowing in these quiet ashes. Back in France, Philip VI acts quickly. He strengthens royal revenues, restores noble loyalties, and prepares for future resistance. You follow him on tour through the provinces, where he is received with polite reverence but underlying wariness. He is not of the direct line. His legitimacy, while settled by law, is not yet sealed by time. And still, you find traces of the Capetians everywhere. The royal seals bear their legacy. The laws Philip IV enforced remain. The cathedrals Louis IX adorned still shine like sermons in glass. Even the roads you walk newer, straighter, better maintained, whisper their names. One curious little moment stays with you during a coronation feast for Philip VI. A piece of gold thread from the Capetian banner was found lodged in the altar's edge. A scribe noted it down, calling it a stitch of memory, left by the kings of old. Historians continue to debate whether the Capetian dynasty truly ended with Charles the Thor or merely transformed. Was the Valois line a clean break or a quieter continuation? The truth, as ever, lies somewhere between ink and tradition. You stand now outside Saint-Denis, where the last direct Capetians sleep in sculpted stillness. Their tombs are quiet, their legacy less so. And as dusk falls, painting the abbey walls in dusky blue, you feel the weight of centuries grow feather light, and the hush of night returns. You awaken in the early hush of a cathedral cloister, dew still clinging to the hedges. The year is 1330, something not long after the final Capetian king has been laid to rest. You walk through a kingdom that seems strangely familiar, yet fundamentally changed. France now belongs to the House of Valois, but the name Capet still lingers, carved into stone, stitched into banners, and murmured in ancestral pride. And so, you take a final drifting walk through the memories of 3 short reigns that mark the twilight of the Capetian line. First, there was Louis VI, le Hutin the Quarrelsome. His reign, you recall, was brief and turbulent. The scandal of his wife's imprisonment, the early experiments in peasant freedom, and his sudden death all unsettled the court. His infant son, John I, reigned for only 5 days, his cradle becoming a tomb before the bells even stopped ringing. Next came Philip IV, the prudent reformer. You watch him reorganize the kingdom, introduce new systems of taxation, and implement carefully crafted laws. But his daughters, though competent and poised, are passed over. Salic law is no longer just an old Frankish notion. It is royal decree. A daughter cannot inherit the crown, no matter how rightful she may seem. And lastly, there was Charles IV, the final Capetian. His reign was quiet, restrained, almost spectral. You remember him pacing the corridors of Vincennes in silence, as though trying to outwalk the ticking clock of dynastic fate. Each king governed in uncertain times, brief reigns, rapid transitions, and a sense of fading grandeur. You walk the halls they once filled, noting how their portraits hang closer to the exits than the thrones. One curious pattern catches your attention. All 3 brothers Louis, Philip, and Charles died without a male heir. Historians still debate whether it was bad luck, bad timing, or quiet divine design. Some chroniclers even whispered of a curse, born of the Templars' ashes or the vengeance of a scorned queen. But nothing ever rose beyond rumour. What you do know is this: with Charles's death, the Capetian house ended as it began, quietly. No last battle, no overthrown monarch, just silence and succession. Yet their legacy endures. The Capetians had transformed the monarchy from a fragile noble post to a dynastic machine. From Hugh Capet's simple coronation in 987 to Charles IV's solemn burial in 1328, they had ruled France continuously for over 340 years. No dynasty in Europe, not even the Plantagenets, matched their longevity, and they built more than just a family tree. They built cathedrals, they built laws, they built a nation. You step now into a small village chapel where a candle flickers before a faded painting of St. Louis. A farmer kneels, whispering a prayer not to a king, but to a memory. And in that prayer, the Capetians live on. The bells toll softly in the distance, and you let your eyes fall gently shut. You awaken beneath the vaulted nave of the Abbey of Saint-Denis, where the air is thick with incense and memory. The marble effigies of kings stretch in rows, hands folded, eyes closed forever. It is here that the final echoes of the Capetian line are gathered, not as a procession, but as a presence. You move quietly between tombs, pausing where Charles V rests in stone beside his brothers and father. The year is now 1328, just past the silence of Charles's passing, and the transition to the House of Valois is complete. But even as the political line continues, something in the world has shifted. You feel it in the cautious tone of the nobles, the tightened scrolls of law, and the unspoken uncertainty beneath every oath of loyalty. France is no longer a realm of kings bound by sacred thread, passed father to son without pause. It is now a realm of claims, of law books, of precedent, and yet the Capetians remain like breath on glass, faint but still visible. You travel through the countryside, to churches where villagers still light candles beneath tapestries bearing fleur-de-lis. You pass waymarkers stamped with the seal of Louis XIX. In Paris, the courts still operate by the rhythms of royal ordinances set down during the height of Capetian order. The past is no longer active, but it is still authoritative. In the shadowed alcoves of the Louvre, now more archive than fortress, clerks still refer to Capetian charters when weighing land disputes. A judge places his hand on a decree issued by Philip IV and murmurs, "We are not the first, we are only the keepers." A curious image lingers in your thoughts. At one of the final councils held under Charles IV, a clerk accidentally addressed the king as "Your Capetian Majesty." A brief silence followed. Then Charles, without blinking, replied, "Let it be said that I was the last, but not the end." He signed the decree. No one corrected the title again. Historians argue over the legacy of this dynasty. Was the Capetian monarchy a slow, deliberate rise to centralization, or a patchwork of reactive decisions stitched together for centuries? Some claim the dynasty's strength lay in its inertia, a kind of political patience that allowed France to consolidate while others fractured. But there's something else, something harder to put into ink. The Capetians ruled not with flair, but with familiarity. Their faces became fixtures in manuscripts, in prayers, in marketplaces. They were not thunderbolts. They were the weather. Now, their weather has passed. You step once more into the quiet at Saint-Denis. You run your fingers along the cold-carved names Hugh, Robert, Louis, Philip, Charles, and feel the softness of history at rest. These were not always great kings, but they were steady ones, and that, in a world so often turbulent, was enough to change everything. Outside, the wind brushes lightly through winter branches. Somewhere, a choir begins to chant vespers, and you let the final sigh of the Capetians lull you toward sleep. You awaken one final time in the soft golden hush of morning, where rays of sunlight drift through tall stained glass windows, painting the flagstones in sapphire, crimson, and gold. You are once again at Saint-Denis, but the abbey is quieter now, more museum than mausoleum, a place not of mourning, but of memory. The Capetian dynasty has long since ended, yet their reign lingers in every corner of the kingdom they helped to shape. You step slowly through the halls of their legacy, as if flipping through a manuscript too delicate to touch. You see it in the roads that crisscross France, many paved during the Capetian age to connect abbeys, markets, and royal cities. You feel it in the laws still rooted in Capetian precedent, in the balance between crown and church, and in the clear, deliberate language of royal justice. You wander through Paris, no longer medieval but still crowned with Capetian echoes. Notre Dame still stands. The Ile de la Cité still holds the bones of kings. Sainte-Chapelle, the jewel-box chapel of Louis IX, still glows with glass and reverence. In every chime of a cathedral bell, in every fleur-de-lis carved into a weathered fountain, the dynasty breathes, and yet, despite their endurance, the Capetians are often remembered less for individual brilliance than for their collective persistence. Few among them were conquerors, fewer still were charismatic, but for over 3 centuries they ruled, calmly, continuously. That was their magic, not power seized in fire, but power passed hand to hand, generation to generation, like a whispered prayer. There are debates, of course. Historians still question whether the dynasty succeeded because of its strength or because of its luck. Would Hugh Capet's legacy have survived if his son Robert had faltered? Would Louis IX have been canonized had he returned from crusade one last time? Would the kingdom have held without Blanche of Castile's steady hand? You may never know the answers. But as you walk once more through the royal necropolis, you pause at the tomb of Hugh Capet, whose simple coronation in 987 started it all. His likeness, carved in stone, is modest. No warhorse, no halo, just a man with a crown, hands folded, eyes gently closed, and in that stillness you feel it, the soft hum of history, not shouting, not marching, but breathing. The Capetians are gone, but France remains, and with it, the gentle inheritance of centuries. Now, my dear sleepy listener, allow yourself to let go. The names, the years, the stone effigies and royal robes, they can rest now, just as you can. Let your thoughts soften like candle wax. Let the rhythm of centuries lull you, slow and tender, into stillness. The flickering torches have all gone out, the scrolls are closed, the gates of the abbey are shut for the night. You have wandered with kings, walked through centuries, and now it is time to sleep. May your dreams be long and your rest be gentle.